Today, we're talking about car aerodynamics. We'll also bust some common myths. For example, does your car use more fuel when you lower your windows versus using the AC? Does a dirty car have better fuel efficiency than a clean car? Similar to golf ball aerodynamics. Why does a Toyota Prius have better air resistance than a Formula One race car? Well, hop in and buckle up, because we're looking at some of the most aerodynamic cars in the market. Aerodynamics is a fancy word. When you hear aerodynamic car, most people envision a sleek, good-looking car. But car shape is only the beginning. Car makers care about aerodynamics, not just because it impacts speed, but also because it impacts the fuel efficiency, interior noise, and handling. So what is aerodynamic? Aerodynamics is a science that studies the motion of air and how it's affected by a solid object like a car. So when we talk about vehicle aerodynamics, we're talking about car features that reduce air resistance as quickly and economically as possible while keeping the car on the ground and not taking it off like an airplane. You can think of it this way. Ever bike in the direction of a strong oncoming wind? Normally, you tilt your body forward and you do it without thinking about it. Well, the tilted position reduces air resistance, and of course, you need to spend more energy and strength to move forward. With a car, even without headwind, you're driving at higher speeds. The higher the speed of a car, the greater the resistance of the air. Engineers use coefficient of drag, or CD, to measure the force of air resistance on an object like a car. The lower the coefficient, the easier it is for the car to overcome air resistance. Nowadays, most passenger cars have a CD of around 0.3. SUVs typically have a CD around 0.3 to 0.4 or higher, and pickup trucks normally have a CD of 0.4. Remember the example of biking against the wind? The stronger the wind, the more energy you need to pedal, and likely your speed will decrease. If you pedaled with the same energy as you would in non-windy weather, then your speed would be several times higher. A car engine works the same way. The higher a car's drag coefficient, the longer the engine has to run at a higher RPM to maintain a certain speed. Think of earlier cars like the Model T. They were basically boxy cars, not really aerodynamic. They had a high drag coefficient and a low power engine. But look at the Toyota Prius hybrid. Some will say that its body shape is not exactly pretty, and that it's the exact opposite extreme from the Ford Model T. But the Prius has a CD of 0.24, which helps it achieve very high gas mileage. So, the shape of the modern car is not just a creative visual design, but it also reflects the research of aerodynamic engineers and helps to reduce fuel consumption. What do you think the drag coefficient is on a Formula One race car? Maybe you assume it has a super low CD, certainly less CD than a Toyota Prius, but actually a typical F1 car has a CD of about 0.7. So then, how can it reach a speed of more than 200 miles an hour? Aerodynamics is more than just air resistance or drag. There are other factors involved, like lift and downforce. Lift is the force that opposes the car's weight and raises the car into the air to allow for straight line speed. Downforce is the exact opposite of lift. It's the force that presses a car towards the ground, which helps the car get good grip and traction, which is necessary when you're cornering at high speed. Take an airplane, for example. At first, it drives like a huge car as it taxis and speeds down the runway. But as the speed increases, the air under its wing creates lift and the plane takes off from the ground, which you don't want your car to do. By the way, did you know that most airplanes usually try to take off against the wind? Why? Because the stronger the headwind, the more lift it creates, and so it's easier for a heavy object to rise into the air off the ground. That's why airplane runways are always built with the average wind direction in mind. In the continental U.S., most winds blow from west to east. That's why most American runways are oriented in that direction. Formula One cars are designed to create maximum downforce. They're extremely lightweight, so they experience lift at some speeds, and they can take off like an airplane if incorrectly designed. That's why you need downforce to keep the car on the ground. Engineers achieve this by adding wings or spoilers to the front and rear of the race car. The wings channel the airflow to press the car to the ground. In other words, they create downforce. But if you have too much downforce, it impedes the lift and reduces the car's ability to reach a high straight line speed. So it's a balancing act between downforce and lift. And believe it or not, they say that a Formula One race car has so much downforce that if you got going fast enough and you flipped it upside down on the bottom of a road on a bridge, it could actually drive that way, that the force would keep it upside down driving. What about production vehicles? Many production vehicles also include aerodynamic structures to generate downforce. Take, for example, the supercar Nissan GTR. Its body was intentionally engineered to channel air over the car and back through the oval rear spoiler. Or look at the Ferrari 599 GTB Fiorano. You can notice B-pillars. Those are there to help channel air to the rear to reduce drag. Or look at the original Audi TT. When it was first released in 1998, it came without a rear spoiler. The rear surface created too much lift, so then there were reports of accidents and concerns about the car's stability at high speeds. Finally, Audi modified the design and added a rear spoiler to reduce lift and increase downforce. All TTs after 2001 have been produced with rear spoilers. But let's back up a bit. We mentioned earlier that Ford Model T wasn't exactly aerodynamic. Back then, car makers simply didn't care about aerodynamics. That's because passenger cars back then were relatively slow. So when did car makers start being aware of aerodynamics? Well, in 1921, a German named Edmund Rumpler made the Rumpler Kroppen Auto. He based the shape on a teardrop. In fact, the car name translates to teardrop car. Why was he fascinated with a teardrop? Well, a teardrop has a CD of 0.27, and it's the most aerodynamic shape in nature. But unfortunately, consumers didn't find the shape appealing to the car, so it didn't sell very well. A few years later, Chrysler got inspired by birds in flight. They created a car called Airflow. It was one of the first American cars to be designed with aerodynamics in mind. This was back in the 1930s, but America was pulling through the Great Depression, so their car didn't really sell well either. Fast forward to the 50s and 60s, America was in a different era. Race car engineers were streamlining car shapes to make cars go faster. Around this time, the world started seeing front and rear spoilers and shovel noses that create downforce. But it wasn't until the 1980s that the major consumer car makers really started applying aerodynamics to passenger car designs. Audi 100 is one of the first passenger sedans to have a CD of 0.3. That was a big aerodynamic feat in its day. Nowadays, almost all modern cars are engineered with aerodynamics in mind in some way. So what are some of the most aerodynamic passenger cars today? It'd be the ones with the lowest drag coefficient. If you're looking for an eye-catching aerodynamic passenger car, some of the most aerodynamic ones out there include the Mercedes-Benz A-Class and Mercedes-Benz CLA. The CD of these cars is 0.22. Believe it or not, the Toyota Prius in its fourth generation is a CD of 0.24. Tesla Model X with a CD of 0.25 is capable of accelerating from 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds, which is pretty impressive. It has a streamlined design and a spoiler that help cut through the air easily. Then we have the Audi A6 and BMW i8. These cars have a CD of 0.26. The Mazda 3 Salon follows with a drag coefficient of 0.27. But now, let's address some common myths about aerodynamics. So it's a hot day. Should you open the windows or just run the AC? Either way, both options increase fuel consumption. But which option eats less fuel? Well, it all depends on the ambient temperature. There's an association called SAE, previously known as the Society of Automotive Engineers. It consists of 120,000 engineers and technical experts in the aerospace and automotive industries. They did various tests on this, and they found that at about 61 degrees Fahrenheit, there's very little difference whether you roll down the windows or run the AC. The fuel consumption from engine load and aerodynamic resistance ends up being pretty much the same. But at higher ambient temperatures, your fuel consumption increases more when you roll down the windows. In other words, running the AC eats less fuel as temperature increases. But that said, low drag cars are more impacted than high drag cars. So the result isn't all that clear, cut and dried. SAE said more tests are needed on different cars to be definitive. Well, what about the myth about the dirty car? Some people think a dirty car has better aerodynamics than a clean car and therefore better fuel economy. Well, this thinking is based upon the golf ball principle. It's been known that the dimples on a golf ball create turbulence which sucks air to the ball. In other words, they create a certain vacuum in the air and therefore reduce air resistance. That's why a dimpled golf ball can travel 40% further than a simple ball with a smooth surface. But here's the difference. Dimples on a golf ball are uniform and evenly distributed, but in the real world, a dirty car doesn't have dirt in a uniform manner. Instead, we have randomly distributed dirt particles and insects. And randomness does the opposite. It actually creates more drag. Dirt and insects attached to your car paint can actually reduce fuel economy by as much as 10%, depending on the dirt amount, size, and location. So, keeping your car clean and smooth is more more aerodynamic and fuel efficient. Not to mention it looks better. If you enjoyed the video, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for your support.